Hello everyone, welcome to a late night episode of Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. Today, for this special late night evening episode, we'll be doing a initial book impressions of Angelic Wars, End of the Beginning by Rick Norris. Now, if you've seen my more recent videos, you may remember that I made a video of this detailing that this was a thank you from Rick for the interview I had with him. Now, this is the second book in the trilogy, and according to Rick, this can be read independently from Angelic Wars First Rebellion. But in Angelic Wars First Rebellion, it does introduce the characters, so I would recommend reading the first book. And since it is the second book of the series, it will continue the journey of the main characters in that story. And with that, let us read the summary. The epic war for heaven continues. End of the Beginning is the second full musical novel of the internal struggles and external battles among the angels for the control of heaven during Satan's rebellion. This novel can be read independently of the first novel, First Rebellion, though the first novel introduces readers to the characters, as I said previously. In First Rebellion, Azaraius, the leader of the seven Septimirdi, searches heaven for rebellious angels in order to offer them God's grace. Satan rejects Azaraius' offer and instead begins to expand his evil throughout heaven's districts. In the End of the Beginning, Azaraius leads the Septimirdi to capture loyal angels so that they can help fight Satan and eject him from heaven into the material world, otherwise known as Earth. Like all the Angelic War musical novels, the reader can hear the characters sing by scanning the QR code in paperbacks and clicking hyperlinks in ebooks for a unique reading experience, which is true. So on the back of this book, there is a QR code that you'll be able to read a little bit more about the story. And throughout the book, there will be QR codes to hear characters sing a song, or a hymn or poem's going to be said. And with that being said, let us begin the very first few chapters of Angelic Wars, End of the Beginning. Chapter 1. The heavenly gale assaulted Azaraius' face, pounding the angel mercilessly with particles, distant voices wailing for the attention of his ears. Where were his Septimirdi companions? Were they suffering too? Hadn't God just ordained them as heaven's archangels to cast Satan and his followers out of heaven? Their crash from God's throne to heaven's second level didn't seem like the right way to commission them. It was anything but angelic. Azaraius struggled to stand, the unsteady siliculum granules refusing support to his elbows, his golden strands of hair dancing off his shoulders. He searched for his tome, the screen the guardian cherub had given him to observe with the other 6 Septimirdi when they conducted missions. Did he lose it in the last confrontation with Satan, maybe at God's throne? How would he lead the others if he couldn't observe them when on missions? He turned and glanced behind. His 6 partially buried comrades shifted in the silicum. It was a relief that they were still together. Azaraius returned his gaze forward, refocusing his dark blue eyes at the distant mesas. The storm partially obscured the golden amberlight petals dripping over the flat-topped lips toward the hungry valleys below. Amberlit, he said to the blossoms. Its alluring scent still attracts me. I long to climb the mesas to be with it again and hear the singing from God's throne above. He dropped his head and exhaled. We're finally home. Alberca. Azaraius lifted his head again, this time towards the moaning sound. His eyelids surrendered to the frenzied particles blowing across the surface. He stood. Good. Azaraius could see better now. Hearing the sounds of struggling angels, he glanced behind him, then returned his attention to the noise clamoring from the large valley in front of him. What do you see? Asked Michael, steadying himself on Azaraius' shoulder with his oversized silver-toned hand. There, in the distance, Azaraius raised his arm. Across the plains. Do you see them? Michael stepped forward, shielding his face with one of his wings. Serpents, like those I've seen in visions of Earth. The others gathered around. Azaraius had seen so many of Satan's abominations. How could a mere cherub create and not be the creator? These angel-sized, hideous serpent forms threatened him in a different way than the other atrocities. His lips trembled. Gabriel joined the troop, stretching out his great 15-foot wings. How many are there? Thousands? Azaraius shook his head, eyes set fast. Yes, 100,000. How could this be? It couldn't be Abbadon and his minions. The Septimiri had repelled that rebellious angel to the other side of heaven. In Laodicea, after escaping Satan's lair to God's throne, the large vipers slithered inside out, their faces closing in the front, their cylindrical bodies protruding forward, their back ends open and peeled forward, hugging their bodies and then over their faces, the way the serpents shed on earth. This peeling allowed them to sink their rears to the front where they closed, creating new heads. This back to front molting caused a face to appear with the conclusion of each cycle. Malachi, the historian, moved to Azaraius' side, out of the corner of his eye, her slightly hooked nose alerting him. I have no record of these serpent types in heaven. They are not God's creation in their present form. Squantinibble, the newest member of the Septimiri, didn't hesitate to voice his opinion. Satan's evil must have morphed something. Just like in the Paragonum Bibliotheca, I was looking at a beautiful picture in a book given by God, when the face of Satan burst through the pages. That experience still seemed to unnerve Squantinibble. Satan had haunted him throughout heaven. The attack had reached a climax when the team entered the Bibliotheca on their way to rescue Raphaela and Malachi. Azaraius hadn't been sure if Squintible could hold it back then. But this stout little angel seemed to have found his self-confidence when he replaced the traitorous Pollyon. But for how long? Satan had a way of resurrecting insecurities, relentlessly prying into their weaknesses. The serpent sirens modulated and echoed off the messless bluff, creating perfect but demented chords. The tones raised and lowered their pitch in union to combine into massive 12-tone harmonies. These chord voicings injected a sickening feeling into Azaraius' spirit. They chilled him, alarmed him, and overcame him. Azaraius had to hide his shaking hand from the others. After all, these angels depended on him to lead. He held his ground. Before visiting the Lord's throne, the Septimiri had offered the enemy mercy and grace, but it all changed when the enemy rejected God's limitless grace. The seven were now God's warriors. The Septimiri must render God's judgment and remove these rebels from heaven. But how could they? There was, again, his lack of faith, even after what God had done for them. You'd think after the word had spoken to him at God's throne, he would trust him. Would he ever learn? Doubt seemed to be his nagging companion. Azaraius gazed at Uriel and Raphael. Nobody seemed to know what to do. God had equipped all of them with his full armor, including the word of the Spirit sword. The weapon's gold hilt clung to each of their breastplates, its blades retracted. Was this a time to use it? How? No one taught them. Azaraius thought about the word sword's construction, a handle resembling a standing being with arms stretched out, with an open Alpha Omega book on its chest. It hardly looked like a weapon to defend heaven against an onslaught by this multitude. The serpents increased their slinking rate, each cycle closing the gap between them and the Septimiri, a metallic liquid circling just under their top layers from their head to tail. Azaraius could now see their features, tormented faces of Seraphim, God's loyal angels. His body tightened. He'd never seen angels or spirits tortured in such a way. How was Satan distressing them? Azaraius, help us! Raphaela! The snakes screamed out each of the Septimiri's names in random order, their shrieks partially inaudible, lifting onto their tails, their heads swooning from side to side. Azaraius' companions covered their ears. Squintible used his arms as if the serpents directed their wailing at him alone. Then one serpent yelled out, Ego laus et Deus intus vos. I see the God in you. This was the battle cry the enemy chanted at Satan's throne in Peragum. Michael, the big one, pushed himself forward to the front, toppling Malachi, yanking his sword hilt from his chest. Energy electrified his body. starting from his hand, migrating up to his arm, and finally to the rest of his body. Azaraius' eyes widened. "Michael, what are you—" Too late. Michael charged down the slope towards the invasion. 3 interlocking blades exploded from the sword's hilt, weaving into a fiery point, a commanding point, a point burnishing the silicum around him. "Come on!" said Azaraius, waving his arm. He had no choice. How were they going to battle this many evil spirits with just 7 swords? The other Septimirvi charged with Michael in the lead. Some ran faster than others, with Squintable and Uriel bringing up the rear. The gap between them closed. "I know that face," screamed Michael, pointing his finger at the lead serpent. "It is Dionysus, the Philadelphian administrator," Raphaela cried out, her voice breaking with each word. "No, it can't be." What happened? Had Dionysus surrendered to the enemy? Azaraius heard about the horrible scene. Satan had melted billions on the hillside, the Nephria spheres, flooding the underground districts of Philadelphia. Angels panicked. Satan's spirits attacked unknown numbers in the darkness, Raphaela and Dionysus among them. The last time the Septimirvi spoke with Dionysus, he had been sitting near the rising Philadelphian deluge, blaming himself for Raphael's apparent demise that had saved him. All of that had changed when the Septimirvi had rescued Raphaela, who resurfaced in the Laodicean district. But what of Dionysus? The enemy may have recaptured him and transformed him into a wretched mass of despair. Was he following Satan? How were they to know? The creature wailed, "Raphaela, help me!" Raphaela clenched her fist. Her lower voice was almost hoarse. "Stop it! You're not Dionysus! Stop it! You can't be!" The creature's wail dissolved with each plea, the ferocious wind swallowing it. "Save us! Save us! Save us!" Michael slowed his gait, stopping several feet from the Dionysus spirit. "Dionysus!" cried Raphaela, lunging past Azaraius. Michael grabbed her and turned her around, her clear, soft blue eyes wet with anguish. The Dionysus serpent's body recoiled, each loop elongated as the creature spiraled above the Septimirvi to 25 feet tall, its 2 eyes of fire staring down at God's chosen archangels. The grotesque creature opened its mouth as it arched over Michael, a foul odor assaulting the amber-lit scent, its teeth dripping over Michael's head. Michael swung the sword from left to right, lopping off its jaw and then to its left and right in one motion. Through its large coiled neck, the menace exploded into black particles, blowing high into the atmosphere in the direction of the Sikh. The others joined in the assault. The attackers couldn't be loyal angels, but rather Satan's abominations of them. Regardless, Azaraius knew they had to defend themselves, but how? The 7 of them couldn't defeat such a large force. Thyatira's cliff balanced on the edge of the 2 winding intersection canyons, guarding angel secrets within its castle. Abbadon's flasky walk pricked Pollyon's attention. The angel pranced his signature stride across the courtyard, swaying his wings from side to side. Pollyon found this display annoying, but the Great One taught them to accept their fellow rebellious angels in their new chosen roles, including outward transformations. "Egos laus a Deus intus vos." "I see God in you," said Abbadon. "Ego laus a Deus intus vos, Abbadon." "You want to see me?" "Yes," said Pollyon. "I have met with the Great One, and he has promoted me with the sash color of purple. I am now the rank of a lieutenant." Abbadon grabbed Pollyon's arms and stopped. "You?" He glanced to the side and then back at Pollyon. "I brought you into our ranks. At first you didn't believe me about the Great One's power. I proved it to you by setting a trap for Michael and Gabriel in Cerimon." Pollyon drilled his eyes into Abbadon. "Yes, I admit I was skeptical, but one cannot be too careful when challenging the Creator. I converted when the Great One gathered 200,000 angels in Samira. He demonstrated power, a power that I wanted, a power that he promised me, and a power that will be mine." Pollyon shook Abbadon's grip loose, his eyes riveted. "And besides, you let Michael and Gabriel get away." 2 unfamiliar angels on the steps edged closer. Pollyon motioned Abbadon to move. "There are 2 significant changes in terminology which you should communicate to your subordinates. The Great One proclaimed that his title doesn't describe his greatness compared to the Creator." Abbadon's face remained unmoved. Pollyon continued. "The Great One has accepted the name that the Creator has now given him, Satan. Satan said it means adversity, adversary. By labeling him Satan, the Creator has now recognized him as an equal. You are to tell our followers that they are to refer him as Satan." "Satan," mused Abbadon. "Well, that is certainly easier to say. There is one more thing." This time Pollyon grabbed Abbadon's arm and moved him around the corner of the wall. I learned when I was a Septimian Ephes that there are enemy angels in at least 7 districts, including here. Malachi revealed their names inscribed on pillars above the theater. They are in hiding. Pollyon lowered his voice to a whisper. They are counter-revolutionaries amongst us. We must validate the loyalty of any suspicious angel. If they are not with us, we must take them as prisoners. How do we know which angels are loyal? Laughed Abbadon. Survey them? Pollyon's face remained hard. Angels who are loyal to the Creator cannot lie, he said, even if it means compromising their safety. He pressed his lips together. We will cause an uproar if we question the loyalty of everyone in our district. Abbadon shook his head and exhaled. Pollyon continued, but there is one way to confirm their loyalty to the Creator. I believe they will have the sign of the Septimirvi on their right wrist, and when the Creator's spirit is present, it will inflame. Abbadon lowered his eyes and ran his tongue over his lips. His intelligence seemed to be higher than any other angel in the rank and file, but his pride and self-aggrandizing interfered with his wisdom. What if we delegate a secret special force to spy on our angels? That is an excellent idea, said Pollyon. When the secret force encountered a suspicious angel, they will require that angel to show their right wrist. He paused, his eyes shifting away, and then back to Abbadon. We will call them the Protection Squardon. Protection Squardon, mused Abbadon. Okay, I will choose an elite group of angels to seek and imprison those counter-revolutionaries. I will gather the most loyal comrades to start here in Theatria. Pollyon knew he could depend on Abbadon to carry out orders. His loyalty to the cause was exemplary despite his faults. He snapped his fingers. Oh, the other point. He raised himself slightly, standing more erect. I suggested to Satan a name that distinguished us from the Creator's holy order of angels. He whispered into Abbadon's ear. Legion. Abbadon pulled back, his eyes puzzled. Pollyon continued. Legion is a good name because we are many, and our numbers are growing. As he was still speaking, 2 angels rounded the corner and stopped short. Pollyon recognized them as the 2 on the steps who had been eyeing them when he spoke loudly. The taller one sported silver hair that contrasted with his bronze complexion. The shorter one had lavender hair with a silver hue to her face. The stranger slid back around the corner, faces blushed. Pollyon threw Abbadon a glance. Here's our chance. They must be members of the Holy Order. We can torment them to find others. The 2 Satan allies rushed toward the loud crowd in the courtyard center. Pollyon, standing a head taller than Abbadon, stood on his toes and craned his head. Do you see them? He shouted. There must be 100 angels. Abbadon took flight, his arms outstretched. Look, to the left, the tall one. He landed within a few feet of the bronze sylphid angel, who again slipped beyond his reach among conversing angels. The crowd took notice, its volume decreasing a notch. The 2 officers pushed through the crowd, losing sight of the zigzagging angels as the crowd's gatrians kept opening and closing like passages between Earth's North Pole ice sheets. During the confusion, various angels took flight in an attempt to get above the commotion. Pollyon's view morphed into a sea of disorganized white translucent wings dotted with confused faces. He spotted Abbadon pushing others to the side. Where? Where did he go? Abbadon's face tufted, He raised his arms and turned. I lost him. Pollyon caught up to him, still stretching his neck in one last desperate attempt. He clenched his fists and joined his fellow angel in the surrender. The 2 exited the crowd. Pollyon sighed. In addition to our protection squadron, we must be proactive. Let's get back to Ephesus and get the list off the pillar that Malachi had transcribed onto his sheets. The names of the hidden angels will help us track down each of these counter-revolutionaries. Putrid smoke continued to veil the mess's beautiful view. Azaraius could not count the thousands of towering serpents that Septimirvi had slain using the word sword. The serpent's slow, slithering pace helped the 7 angels, but how long could they survive against the hundreds of thousands of serpent spirits? The full armor of God protected them, but the 7 angels could not repel all of these attackers with slashing swords. The weapons would fall short in the battle of this magnitude. In the beginning, they had 2 choices: flee or fight. Michael decided for them by charging the menace. Azaraius, cried Uriel, his voice raging in octane. They are surrounding us. Uriel, Raphael, Malachi turned to the rear to fight the serpents who had flanked them on both sides. We have to fly, yelled Gabriel, his voice barely above the wailing. We cannot retreat, cried Azaraius, his sword now guaranteeing in continuous figure eights against the onslaught. That would allow them to attack Alberca and overrun our base. They were trapped and out of options. The others couldn't hear Azaraius' prayer. Lord, God of my salvation, I cry to you. You are the defense of our lives. Whom shall we fear? Am I going to lose the war for you? We should have never committed to this fight without asking you first. We have failed. Fiery missiles arched from the hazy horizon, looping into the serpent masses. Massive explosions shook Azaraius off his feet, the heated blast overwhelming him. In rapid-fire succession, the fiery projectiles sprayed over the plain, incinerating serpents. A consuming fire spread among the coiled snakes, fanned by a gust that had intensified to gale strength. The enemy's wails dropped in octane shrills, still cutting into Azaraius' ear. The attackers' remains dissolved into black flakes. Raphaela stumbled backward into Michael as a ring of fire ignited the snakes surrounding the seven. The cries dissipated and then stopped altogether. Black smoke rose toward God's throne above as millions of black particles surrendered to the wind, carrying them to an unknown destination. Azaraius stumbled to his feet, brushing his shoulder-length golden hair out of his face. Could this be God's work? He didn't work this way. He always used the faith of his servants to execute his will. Azaraius should have been accustomed to strange changes in heaven by now. The putrid stench of burning spirits still suffocated him. These were not God's creations. They were distortions and abominations. Satan was far more powerful than Azaraius could have imagined a cherub could be. What other distorted creatures will assault the Septimirvi and the Holy Order? They could not defend themselves. And what did the other members of the Septimirvi think of him? He had relied on God in the Permangium escape. That certainly showed his leadership skills. But now the challenge changed. Would his gifts be inadequate in this new assault? They were no longer just battling cherubim and Septimirvi. Frankly, he didn't know what they were fighting or how to fight them. Michael's impulsive move to use the word had almost cornered them to an impossible situation. Azaraius was afraid for any of them to use it again. All these angels retracted their swords and placed the hilts on their chests. He felt Michael's large hand on his shoulder. Azaraius glanced to his side and then shifted his eyes back to the plains. The violent gales now ceased. Smoldering fires were patiently consuming their victims, adding to the particle smoke that shielded the Messa's gilded skirts, choking the serenity they had once offered to God's loyal subjects. Where do we go from here, Azaraius? There are so many districts in heaven. If this was a sign of captive angels, how do we free them? Azaraius turned his back to the fiery plain. Well, Michael, we know Malachi has a list of angels in each of the 7 districts we visited. He glanced at the others. I don't think these were loyal angels. Satan can change the outward appearances of created beings. I think these were enemy angels, morphed into hideous beings, with the faces of those in hiding or captivity. Satan could be luring us to rescue them and trap us with them. The wind picked up again, coming from beyond the burning masses. It pressed their faces, yet their robes remained still. A song, a faint tune of a lone troubadour, echoed off the masses. Squintable stepped forward, peeking and peering into the smoky fog, his speech surrendering to an unintelligible whine, an octane higher than usual. Is this another attack? I can't see through the smoke. His eyes rocketed. A stinging silhouette emerged from the smoke at a casual saunter, drawing closer. The song didn't seem threatening, but oddly joyful. Its lyrics were now audible. It is you. It is not me. You're the one who set me free. As I walk, as I fall in your spirit, prepare, he has come to you. Prepare and follow through. As we walk, as we fall in his spirit, this is the day the Lord has made. Rejoice and shout out accolades. Alleluia. His love endures forever. Clap your hands and shout his name. And from the darkness a glorious flame. Alleluia. His grace endures forever. Hear the voice called from the plains. Resist the coming of the rains. As you walk, as you fall for his spirit, his warm love like the wind is a force against all sin. As you walk, as you fall for his spirit, this is the day the Lord has made. Rejoice and shout out accolades. Alleluia. His love endures forever. Clap your hands and shout his name. And from the darkness a glorious flame. Alleluia. His grace endures forever. Alleluia. His grace endures forever. A small figure sauntered out of the smoke, and then it stopped. and we will stop here for our initial review. Now, this, just like the last book, is great. It sets up the world and what is to be expected. Now that the Septimiri and Azaraius now have to fight and save these angels, all the while Pollyon and Abbadon are now tasked with finding these counter-revolutionaries, torturing them, and imprisoning them. Honestly, I love this story. It is so good. The characters are fantastic. Everything about this is incredible. I love reading this new story. Now, if you love fantasy, if you love a story with a good message, and if you love sort of those themes of like good versus evil, then this is the one for you. I know a lot of people may not be into a lot of religious fantasy, but honestly, if you followed my work and know the works that I have done, with one being Michael, Last Angel of Earth, which is on Inkit, this book is very similar. It is really good. It is phenomenal, and honestly, this gets another 4.5 out of 5 for me. This is an incredible book, and I will link the first initial book review in this video, as well as my interview with author Rick Norris. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this late night episode on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. Thank you all very much for your support. Thank you again to all the new subscribers who have subscribed. And this has been the Wandering Scribe, signing out.